want to start off with George Floyd and what has taken place here over the last 24 to 48 hours. If you haven't seen the video, it's tragic. It really is. But I think you have to see it. I think you have to watch the video to see why people are so irate and up in arms. I don't care what the color of your skin is. If you have a heart, you should be heartbroken. But what happened to this man, George Floyd? Allegedly using a fake $20 bill in a store. And by the way, we don't know if he did that or not. What we do know is that it appears, based on all the other surveillance video that we've seen, that he wasn't resisting arrest. Or if he was, it was not putting the police in harm's danger. Cop puts his knee over his neck. Guy's fighting for his life, says, "Please, officer, I can't breathe." He dies. He's murdered. Those 4 police officers have now been fired, and now we're just waiting. It's just a matter of time before at least one or hopefully all of these officers are charged with something. But we're going to have to wait and see. The mayor in that city is calling for that police officer to be charged with murder. The mayor. What does that tell you? But then, last night, if you watched any of the news last night, you'd know that there were a lot of riots in the streets of Minneapolis. A lot of riots. And the person we have with us on the line right now has been covering this story for Kare 11 right there in Minneapolis. He was actually there watching these protests and riots. His name is Jordy Foy, and I want to get his perspective. It's one thing to watch this on TV. It's another thing if you were actually there. Jordy, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
No problem. So, Jordy, let me start with this. What did you see? What did you hear? My understanding is you were there covering this for your station. What did you actually see when you went there, and describe to us the scene?
Well, when I got there, the first thing that anyone would think, it was shocking. You know, I work overnight, and so I covered this, as it was happening. We got the call in, early Tuesday night that something happened. The police let us know, they made it sound like a critical medical incident, and then the videos started coming in. And so I went to bed, early Wednesday morning, and around 3, there was protests, and, that obviously developed overnight. And then I went to the protest later on, and the city was burning down. There was people had fireworks. They were throwing M80s at the police. Police were firing back with these rubber bullets. That's when people started looting around 8:30 last night. I was there, and people are smashing buildings, smashing windows, spray painting doors. It was shocking. And there's some like police, there's some bad police, there's some great police, there's, protesters that were there to, look for justice and, honor George Floyd. And there was people there just to cause chaos and disrupt.
And my understanding is that the family of George Floyd, just like there have been other situations where the families of some of these victims have said, look, we want to peacefully protest because that's what George Floyd would have wanted, right? And then because my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but George Floyd, at least from what I've heard, was not a violent man at all. In fact, he was a fairly peaceful human being. So don't you think that some of these people in Minneapolis that are violently protesting, that are fighting with police, that are throwing stuff at police, that are burning down buildings, that are looting, that are ruining these businesses, don't you think they're doing the opposite of what the Floyd family would want them to do?
Exactly. I think, people forget that there's a man who died. His family is now watching, their loved one become the face of this national story, and they're barely having time to grieve. And there's these protesters out there that don't realize, lighting their community on fire, looting from these businesses, take away from their cause.
Yeah, there's no question. And I'm watching this live on television. Like I said, you were there, so you saw it for yourself. I heard a story that there was at least one looter that was shot by a local business owner, and then they brought in the National Guard. Can you tell me a little bit about this, and is it true?
So, yes, police got called out to a business and report of a stabbing. It turns out that stabbing was actually a gunshot wound. And, yes, there are reports that an owner was defending his store. And, last night, working overnights, we were getting all these calls, and we had reporters out on the streets. And business owners were actually standing in front of their businesses to protect them so they wouldn't, be looted or burned down. And after my shift got done around 7:30 this morning, I went to kind of just look at the aftermath of some of these buildings. And while I was there taking pictures, there was a young man standing in front of a broken, door that had a broken window in it. And he was just staring inside the store. And a business owner next to that store came out and said, "Don't even think about it." And the kid ran off.
Wow.
Yeah, and
So,
correct me.
They're looting in daylight at 7:30 in the morning.
And Jordy, correct me if I'm wrong, but the business that the man that broke into was shot at was a pawn shop.
Yes.
All right, so if you're just joining us, we're speaking with Jordy Foy, works with Kare 11, covering this story in Minneapolis. Of course, this involved George Floyd, the young man who was murdered by a police officer. I'm just going to call it for what it is. That's what it is. So Jordy, I have to ask you this. What is the relationship before this with local law enforcement and minorities? Because there are some people out there that want to say this had nothing to do with race. I think those people are buffoons. Obviously, in my personal opinion, this had a lot to do with race. Give me the relationship between law enforcement and minorities. I remember when I was covering the story in Ferguson, and don't get me wrong, the Michael Brown case, the circumstances surrounding that are very different than this case. But with that being said, the law enforcement in Ferguson, didn't have the best track record with minorities there. What has it been like in that area as far as you know?
Well, I grew up in this area, but I've moved away. I've lived in Milwaukee and here, and both had, some tense relationship with the police department. And I think people are still, I don't know if you remember a couple of years back, but the Philando Castile case, I think,
sure.
Those,
Yep.
That's still fresh in a lot of people's minds. And I think some people might be upset that, they're, like most governments and most city officials, they want to do the right thing. They want to, ease this tension. And I think some people here maybe don't think enough is being done.
Let me ask you this. Do you see these protests lasting a lot longer? I think they're going to last, and you know more than me, but I think they're going to keep lasting until these police officers are brought to justice. Do you expect more protests tonight and throughout the week, or do you see this thing ending sooner than later? What is your feel, since you've been there for a long time? How long do you think these protests are going to go for, and do you expect more tonight?
Well, that's hard to say. I know, with the mayor requesting the National Guard's help, I know that definitely doesn't ease tension around here by any means. I saw on Facebook that the Black Panthers from Milwaukee are now on their way, and, protesters are coming from across the country here. There's a protester that we did a story on from St. Louis who, it reminded him of the Ferguson protest. So he, got on a plane and came here to, for the cause. And so I think we're going to see a couple more days of this at least.
Yeah.
There needs to be some sort of
and Jordy, peaceful
conversation.
protesting is fine, but rioting is not fine, and
Exactly.
there is a fine line between the two. And you're right. It looks to me like there are a lot of people in Minneapolis last night that leveraged this horrible situation for a reason to basically act like an asshole. Like that's what the country saw last night. Do you think that the police department felt hamstrung as far as how they could respond after what took place with George Floyd?
Yeah, I think they were definitely put in their corner with how they could respond. They definitely had to keep themselves safe because a lot of these officers, as I was talking to my coworkers, they're going home to families too.
Sure.
Right.
Well, Jordy,
And,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and, so they're put in a corner of, like, how much can they do? They don't want to make this situation any worse. But then again, they have to protect themselves.
Right.
Jordy, I think, it's not easy to do what you've done and what everyone at your station in that area has done, is that as a journalist, as someone who's, whether you're a producer or a reporter, I don't care who you are, when you're going to go in harm's way, and that's a dangerous situation, and you're going to go there to report the news or to cover it for your station, I think it is I don't know if I'd use the term heroic, but certainly it's brave what you did last night being out there, and I appreciate you, and I appreciate you coming on our show and kind of setting the scene and explaining everything. If you're out there again tonight or this week, please be safe, and we appreciate you coming on with us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Sure, appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Jordy.
That's Jordy Foy from Kare 11 covering the situation in Minneapolis.